Hi, this is the second in a three-part series on SURFSKI safety. Number 101 on stability, which is for beginners and new intermediates. This one, number 102 on safety kit, safety gear. And then there's 103 on communications. Just a heads up for the experienced paddlers that I have made modifications to my life jacket that might be of interest to you. That impacts the leashes that I use. Number 2, running repairs to broken steering lines. I've got a special leash I've made for that. And then thirdly, I've got a special Rubiales quick release for when you're heading into the impact zone coming into the beach. So the content of this video is number 1, one's life jacket. Number 2, the ski leash or boat leash. Number 3, your paddle leash. Number 4, steering line repairs, where I mentioned I've got that special leash. Number 5, wet weather, cold weather gear. And finally, stowage in one's life jacket. Okay, so let's jump straight into it. So moving on to kit, the life jacket. I've had this fantastic piece of kit, the Mocky life jacket, for I think about 3 years now. For the first year, I did only wave surf skiing. I didn't do any downwinds. I didn't even know about downwinds. So this has lasted me at least 3 years. No signs of wear and tear. I trust this thing implicitly. Fantastic piece of kit. I haven't tried one of the new slimline jackets, but conceptually, my preference is to have more flotation rather than less. In the unlikely event, heaven forbid, of my being separated from my ski. In fact, I have been separated from my ski. In my first year of wave surf skiing, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times at least, I lost my ski backline at Muizenberg. You're 400 meters out, you've got your paddle with you. It's a 15-20 minute swim in, you're getting dumped repeatedly. This thing saved my bacon a couple of times. I've made one modification to the life jacket, and that is if you look at the lower tightening strap, this fits just above your hips. I have fitted this piece of webbing to both sides like this, okay, with a stainless steel ring in the middle. And this is where I attach my boat leash, and this is where I attach my paddle leash. Now for a boat leash, my preference is to use a simple piece of webbing like this. Reason number 1 is if this catches between my leg and the ski when I'm remounting, it doesn't get in my way at all. It doesn't cause any maladjustment. Whereas if I use a regular boat leash, which I used to use, this potentially ends up, misplacing or displacing your leg by, a good centimeter, and in rough conditions that can, tip you in again. The second reason that I prefer this over this is that this is phenomenally strong and has no attachment points. I mean, you just tie a knot on both ends. I'll show you my quick release that I use. Whereas something that's manufactured like this and is joining different pieces of material together potentially has weak points that could break in the future. If you plan to experiment with your own leash setup, please examine your fittings very carefully and never, under any circumstances, use rope. Another advantage of this attachment is that on my quick release, I have attached to the quick release handle a little squash ball that just nestles in my groin. So when you're coming into the beach and you need to detach for the surf break, without even looking, I can just put one hand down into my crotch, grab the squash ball, and I'm released. So just assume I'm sitting in the ski here. This strap here would obviously be relatively taut, spread around my hips. So I'm just going to simulate that by holding these 2 straps here, and then single hand down into my groin. I'll just pull that and it's released. Okay, so that's much quicker than leaning forward and potentially imbalancing yourself while you're grabbing your piece of Velcro around your knee. So for those guys heading for their personal best, I'm a long way from even thinking about that. You potentially save some time and you're not going to imbalance yourself. Right, paddle leash. So for a long time, I was a proponent of the wrist leash because it's small, it doesn't get in your way, but the problem is it is a big constraint when it comes to remounting. I've covered that in a separate video. There's a link in the description below. So my preference now is I've just made this leash myself. It's just made of stretchy material. I mean, it doesn't need to be strong. So this end goes around my shaft, and this end just clips on here next to my boat leash. Okay, next issue is potential breaking of a steering line, which has happened to me in my bluefin, which has stainless steel cables. I've snapped a cable on the back line in Muizenberg, and it took a hell of a long time to get in, and quite nerve-wracking coming through the impact zone when you don't have any control over your ski. I was continually jumping into the water, trying to straighten it and wedge it. I didn't have this piece of kit with me at the time. Admittedly, if you've got Dyneema, then you're far less likely to break a cable. So, you know, my suggestion from a safety point of view would be to have a ski that has Dyneema, because what's it, between 10 and 100 times stronger. I know, since I have replaced the Dyneema steering string on my XTS, and because they were slightly frayed at the back, but frankly I needn't have bothered, because cutting the Dyneema with a pair of side cutters was very difficult to do. Anyway, this is the Mocky emergency steering kit. Whoever invented this piece of kit is a flipping genius. Was that you, David? You, Jasper? I don't know. I'm not going to explain how this piece of kit works, because that's well covered in one of David's videos, other than to say that you need to pre-adjust this to fit your boat. Okay, so the length of these pieces of cord here need to be adjusted such that you've got the right amount of tension for your ski. So I have one of these in my XTS and one of them in my Saudi, and both of them have been pre-adjusted so I don't have to fart around.
In some of the older skis, this black steering box cover is held in place with a regular screw that requires a screwdriver for removal. So you need to ensure that you replace it with a thumb screw to ensure that you can easily remove it whilst at sea.
However, you've got to get to the back of your ski to do that. In order to work on the back of your ski, you've got to release your boat leash, and if it's 30 to 40 knots, that's the last thing you want to do. I've spoken about how these boats can just be picked up and flipped through the air, particularly if you've got one of the light ones, the carbon ones or the hybrid ones. So what I have made for myself is another emergency leash. This is made from Dyneema, so very strong, with two little clip calipers. Okay, so you can see that these elastics are packed up here, but what I would do in the event of having to work on the back of my ski to fit this, first I would attach this to this ring here, okay? Then I would take this ring here and I'd attach it in my boat to the leash mounting point, and then I would detach my regular leash, okay, and then go to the back of the boat. So I'm now tethered to my boat with an emergency work on the back of your boat leash, which is, I think, I pre-measured that this is about 4 meters long. The other thing to consider if you're working on the back of your boat is who's going to be holding your paddle if you don't use a paddle leash. Now, quite a few of the guys that I paddle with don't use a paddle leash at all. But in the event of emergency, someone's got to be looking after that paddle for you. So again, my recommendation: this doesn't get in my way at all. Not a hassle. You can see it in my movies that it doesn't tangle. It's made of elastic. Not an issue for me at all. Okay, storage of phones. I suspect most people store their phone in the front pouch here. My preference is not to do that because, number one, you can damage your phone when you're remounting, and number two, it can potentially get in your way when, interfere with your remount. So I store my phone in my rear pouch, but I've had to make, so I use this, again, this Mocky phone pouch, which I find is very good. No water has got into this. I've made one little modification to my life jacket though, because there's a Velcro closure here. So on the one side, I've attached another piece of Velcro. So there's a male on a female piece of Velcro there. I don't want to pull it off, which means that that's not going to close inadvertently. So I store my phone like this. I've got a long retrieval leash, okay, which goes over my shoulder, and I've tested this in the water that I can just pull my phone out quite easily and operate it. Of all the dangers and threats you face as a surf skier, undoubtedly the greatest is the cold. I mean, you're highly unlikely to be lost at sea. Hopefully someone's going to miss you. You're also highly unlikely to drown, particularly if you're wearing a life jacket and if you're tethered to your ski. But the cold can and will get you. You'll see from the table displayed that in temperatures as low as 0 to 5 degrees, it takes as little as 15 minutes before you will succumb to hypothermia. And the temperatures that we face in False Bay, those of us who are lucky enough to have the Miller's Run in our backyard, the average temperature we'll face is between 12 and 15 degrees, and there you're looking at succumbing to hypothermia in between 1 and 6 hours. So how do I deal with the cold? Well, I'm a complete fan of Mocky gear, and I use this neoprene shirt and pants. I think this is 1 or 1.5 mils. I know that many surf skiers don't like these because of the potential of warming up, but I deal with that simply by just doing a pre-dunk. And of course, if you're getting too warm on the run, you can always practice your remounts and hop in and cool down. And I'm sure that in such instances, if you're worried about your personal best, you can put in an application to the Miller's Maniacs, who will give you a concession of 15 to 30 seconds. As an aside, the Miller's Maniacs, I understand they're a secret society in our club. I think you have to be a Freemason to join them, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, their primary commitment is to doing as many Miller's runs as possible in the year. But they're also in charge of all timing and record keeping, and I'm sure we can get a 15 to 30 second concession against your personal best there, so don't worry about that. A last reflection on my rescue, which happened in March, nearly 18 months ago. It was a cold day, and stupidly I didn't even own any cold weather gear at that stage. I was just wearing a rash vest. I probably spent less than 15 minutes in the water, so I had repeated remount attempts in Smitsvinkel, where I was struggling to get into the ski because of the haystacks and the pyramids, until eventually we decided to raft together, and I held on to Zach, and he kept me above water for the next hour or hour and a half until such time as I was rescued. But even under those circumstances, my core temperature dropped 1.5 degrees, which is kind of borderline mild hypothermia, but just demonstrates the impact of the cold. And my concluding remark on this topic is that you can always cool down by hopping into the water, but you can never warm up. Please remember to check out the other 2 videos in this series, 101 on stability and 103 on communications. And please remember to subscribe until such time as there are 1,000 subscribers on the channel. There's no money going to the NSRI. Thank you. See you next time.